Hey, everybody. Welcome to the end of year podcast for 2017. We've got a lot to cover this year, so I'm not going to do my typical kind of housekeeping maintenance, kind of mentioning the reviews that I've done. I will mention, though, just if you're interested in these games, Tokyo Highway and Welcome to Centerville. I did reviews for those since our last podcast, and if you're interested in a kind of a very almost frustrating dexterity game, check out my video review for Tokyo Highway. And if you want a really kind of in-depth, relatively complex Yahtzee style dice game, check out my video review for Welcome to Centerville. I enjoyed both the games. Definitely go take a look at those. But like I said, there's a lot to cover in this episode, so I'm not going to get into any more depth on that. The last little bit of housekeeping I'm going to mention is you're not going to see anything from me from the month of January. So after you listen to this or watch this on YouTube, I'm going to kind of go dormant for a little while. I don't want to get too belabored on it. It's not really a negative thing. I just need to catch up on some sleep, take a little bit of a break, reboot, retool the channel, just kind of take a step back and gather, my senses and what I want to do. I still have fun doing this. I still look forward to doing this, about once a week or so. And I've kind of talked about that a little bit throughout the last several months on the podcast and the video channel, just in terms of like the conflict between kind of just being a gamer versus a reviewer and, that whole kind of mix of things. So I'm just going to kind of just force myself to not do anything for January and just kind of see what happens after that. So I definitely will be back and, doing probably just some random different things to kind of get warmed back up and that kind of thing. But the review side of it is kind of the part where I have sort of something in my teeth, kind of to speak. So anyway, I just want to kind of give everyone a heads up on that. And then now we're going to go ahead and jump into kind of my best games of 2017. And this is not going to be a top 10 list because I sat down and tried to slice and dice it a number of different ways. I kind of had a top 10, then it would always bleed out into a top 12 and so on. And then there was, a couple of games that I wanted to highlight, but I couldn't really feel comfortable putting them in a top 10 because, maybe they're not like the best or most well-rounded thing, but I wanted to just make a special note of them. So what I'm going to do is kind of walk through the year in chronological order. And the first game on the list is kind of make sense of why I'm doing it this way. And just kind of walk through that. And I think I'm going to get up to about 15 or 17 games that I'm going to cover. And these are all things that I think deserve special note, special call out. So I'm just going to kind of do it that way. But the first thing I'm going to do is mention real quick some honorable mentions that won't really slide into this list for a couple of different reasons. And then at the very, very end, I'll have a top 5 games that I'm looking forward to coming out in 2018, kind of as my bonus little random segment. So let's jump right in. So the first honorable mention is going to be Pandemic Legacy Season 2, and I'm currently in the midst of the campaign there. We're into August now at the time of this recording. Great game so far. Some things I like more than Season 1, some things I like less. I will probably end up doing a spoiler-filled review of it because I don't know, it feels like the best format. So you're going to want to avoid that eventually. That'll probably come out in February because we do plan on finishing it up here in January finally. But it's a good game. But it's kind of like a second edition kind of thing, which is sort of the theme with the rest of these honorable mentions. The next one I'll just kind of honorably mention would be Twilight Imperium 4th Edition, which I haven't actually had a chance to play yet, but we have a game scheduled in January to play, hopefully. I played 3rd Edition. I'm sort of mixed feelings about that, but having actually talked to some people about the changes, I feel like they might address those, so I'm looking forward to that. The next honorable mention would be Warhammer 40,000 8th Edition, and I'm trying to keep that out of this because we'll have some games with miniatures in them, but that's definitely not a board game. It's a full-blown, massive, probably the most miniature of miniature games. But I've had a lot of fun playing that this year. I played in a tournament, played some other handful of pickup games, and really have enjoyed it. And definitely recommend folks give that, as well as Age of Sigmar, a look. They have a very easy way for you to kind of baby step into it, so you don't have to spend too much money. And then if you don't like it, you can kind of get out of it. But I definitely recommend that. And the last honorable mention would be London 2nd Edition, which for sure is something I think worth considering. It is significantly different than the 1st edition of London, but I kind of felt weird putting it on my kind of main list because it is still relatively at its core a game that came out in 2010, but the improvements they've made have certainly made the game a lot better. And London was originally in my top 20, I guess, out of my top 100, and this would probably push it up even further up that list if I were to ever break that down again. So those are just some honorable mentions of things to look at. And we're going to jump into here the first one again in chronological order, at least that I played them. It's roughly going to be the order that they were released as well. And this is kind of the cream of the crop list. And the first game on the list is Gloomhaven. And frankly, that would probably be my number one on the list, but I have not played a single game of this since I think April or May. Fantastic game. Everybody knows about this game usually. I mean, I guess I could say something sort of glib like you must be living under a rock, but you could also be very new to the hobby and listening to this and not have heard of it. This is a fantastic game. It's like kind of the massively multiplayer online role-playing game that is a board game. That's basically what it is. It's huge, it's gigantic, and it has a problem, though, because it is going to eat up all of your gaming time if you choose to delve into it and play it. It's fantastic. It's great. The mechanics are great. The sort of story elements and everything, the sort of unwrapping of the area in the town of Gloomhaven and all the different villains and things that you're going to encounter is awesome. Everything is just a work of genius, honestly, and the way it's put together. But given my sort of lifestyle choice of reviewing new games that come out and also getting into miniature games more this year, it's just not hit the table because I've just not made it a priority. It's really zero reflection on the game. And this is one of the reasons I'll talk about some more why I didn't want to do a top 10, because it's just such a giant wedge into sort of the kind of the general gaming flow of the year. It's such like a wrench in the whole works of things. So it's just a very interesting kind of anchor that's just held itself over my head, and I think over a lot of people's head this year. But I definitely think this is the number one game of the year, just for the sheer audacious innovation, everything. So that's Gloomhaven. Enough about that. Everybody's talked a lot about that this year. The next on the list here, moving along, is Warhammer Quest Shadows over Hammerhall. Now, this is one that I sort of am loosey-goosey about putting in a top 10, but I still want to mention it. Now, I still prefer Silver Tower, which came out a year ago, over this one. So this is kind of the follow-up to Warhammer Quest Silver Tower. Now, this one you can't play cooperatively. You need a game master to kind of engineer and run everything. But this does a lot of interesting, cool things above and beyond other games of this style, like Descent or Imperial Assault. It's a little bit more of a role-playing flavor. You get a little bit more flexibility, especially if you venture out and get some of more of the exotic adversaries. You can get other models and things like that for. So it gives you a little bit more choice and flexibility if you invest a little bit into it. And it has some interesting takes on it. I think the one big takeaway for me is it's not like distinct scenarios. Now, there's different kind of levels of this dungeon that you're going to go in and adventure with heroes and delve down into. But it's not like scenario 1, scenario 2. You can kind of push farther down the dungeon and then kind of go back up and go back to town. And then you can kind of push and go down left or right. And it's one sprawling map. And that's really a fun approach. It kind of lends itself to more of an exploratory type of atmosphere where it's not just kind of really chunked up and, these different sections and things. That's a really cool aspect. And they started to come out with kind of supplemental quests and things like that to add to it. There's just a lot of more flexible narrative involved. And I think that's worth noting. I think folks should kind of take note of that. Really cool. So that's the Warhammer Quest Shadows over Hammerhall. And next one is Ethnos. And this is one that's continued to come out throughout the course of the year. It's a very sort of gateway almost to family style game. It's sort of a small world smashed up with Ticket to Ride, although not quite either of those things. But it's a very easy to get into game. There's a lot of replayability. You can shuffle up the different races that are available in each game. That's going to change up kind of the win conditions and the different mechanics that you can do. But it's definitely one that's still sitting on my shelf after most of the year has gone by. And it's one that I brought out a couple of times at game night and it's gotten played and people have enjoyed it. It's a very kind of easy to get into game, but there is a lot to kind of chew on in terms of strategy and stuff that you're going after. So that's Ethnos. Definitely recommend that game, especially if you're got sort of people that don't want a real heavy game, but want a lot of replayability and fun, basically. And that's Ethnos. So the next game on the list is going to be The Walking Dead All Out War. And I think technically on Board Game Geek, this is a 2016 release, but it really didn't start hitting streets until 2017. And that's one of my sort of pet peeves with these kind of lists sometimes is it'll say, oh, well, that game wasn't published in 2017. It was published in 2016. And I would say, no, Board Game Geek, you're wrong. It actually wasn't. Or there was only 50 copies of the game available to random people at the very, 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 very tail end of 2016. And what if you lived in Guam? Then you may not see it till 2018 or something like that. So a published date is not always a single date. It could be multiple dates based on where you're at in life and everything. But Walking Dead All Out War is basically a miniatures game, although you get everything you need in the single box. You get a little playing mat, you get some terrain, and you're playing through The Walking Dead. Now, I would say you want to get the Days Gone By expansion pack. In my mind, you can get the base game, but you're quickly going to want to get something else, and I would definitely get the Days Gone By expansion pack. This is going to allow you to have some more scenarios, some more different characters and things, and then also unlock a little bit more of like the campaign style thing to kind of, add some more narrative to your games. And it really fleshes out the cooperative aspect of it, which is really cool because you do not see, I think, almost ever. I'm trying to think. I know there's another miniature game that you can do co-op, but this one really excels at the co-op. And that's neat because, most miniature games are head-to-head, 2 players usually, going at it, trying to kill each other, control objectives and all that. But this can be played co-op, which is really neat. It's a really fun way to play kind of with kids and stuff. Is you're working together. You can kind of help them with the measurements and all that and kind of get used to the miniature world. And it's Walking Dead, so, you're killing zombies and stuff. That's no big deal. So that's a really cool feature that they've added to this game. And of course, you can also play it head to head. And even if you're playing it head to head, the zombies are still going to come. They're going to get in the way. So you've got sort of that extra dynamic flair to the table. You're not just like shooting and taking cover. And because sometimes in miniature games, or skirmish games, they can get a little bit static where you're kind of just taking pot shots at each other. But kind of the added flair of the zombies being attracted to noise and all that really spices up the game. So this is definitely one that I would highly recommend anybody. Even if you're like new to miniatures games, you can get this. You don't have to assemble these miniatures. The sculpts are really good, and you can play it co-op again if you get that extra expansion. So it's a nice kind of something you can kind of dip your feet in terms of miniatures, and the price point is very, very, very reasonable. So that's the Walking Dead All Out War game. The next one on the list is Yokohama, and this is brought over to the U.S. by Tasty Minstrel. It's also originally published by Okazu brand. And to me, I think this might be kind of my standout Euro. Now, I'll make a caveat here. At the very end of the list, I'm going to mention a handful of Euro-y games, at least 2 or sort of 3, because a lot of the Essen games are just hitting like now. Like Gaia Project just arrived. And I don't have a chance to play that. I'm recording this over kind of Christmas break. So a lot of these Essen release games that, again, BGG has as a 2017 release, well, most of us folks here in the U.S. aren't going to see them until June of 2018. Anyway, I just want to kind of caveat that because I know there's definitely a decent amount of the Essen games I haven't played or maybe only played once or something. But Yokohama, I think, is a fantastic, innovative, very different style Euro that has definitely mechanics that are familiar, but it does it in such a way that it feels very, very fresh. It's going to have a lot of replayability. It's got kind of a strange kind of worker placement, worker movement kind of idea where you build up this trail of actions and little action cubes that you can then activate your main agent, and he'll move to a different tile that's all kind of randomly arranged, and then you're going in and just kind of converting and building buildings and getting points and all that kind of good stuff. And this just the way that the mechanics sort of engage my brain. You can really sort of almost visually plan out, what your turns are going to be. So you can kind of set up, again, those big combo-y turns, but you can actually visualize it on the board. And it's almost like you're drawing a little blueprint for your actions. Because a lot of times you're trying to plan in your head and you have to kind of keep it in your head. You don't get the actual visual representation of what your plans are for the next couple of turns. And this game has that, where actually it's happening on the board as you are planning and putting these cubes out and sort of building up these steps for the next turn or for the next several turns. And that's a really kind of neat feature. Anyway, so that's Yokohama. And the next game is The Godfather, Corleone's Empire. This is published this year by Simon. And this is a game that we featured on Tabletop Showcase, the first of hopefully many. And this is a game that has continued to come out. I played this with several different groups of people, played it with the family, played it with the game group, played it outside at conventions and things. And across the board, people have really liked it. Heavier gamers have liked it. Families liked it, and more casual, not so heavy gamers have liked it as well. Really interesting. The innovations here are actually relatively subtle. There's like just some real smart, sublime almost design decisions that have been made. It's an area control game. You've got some different kind of sort of target jobs that you're filling based on the actions and the worker placement stuff that you do on the table. It's got sort of a conflicting, you put a guy out to do worker placement, but that's also going to affect area control at the same time on the board, which represents New York City. And so it has a real cool, interesting mechanics there. And it's one that has continued to come out and people have really enjoyed. I know some people had a problem with the price initially, the MSRP, but we've seen that, of course, drop based on market supply and demand. And so I've seen it. You can pick this up for $40 to $50, over the $80 MSRP. And so that's certainly something that I think is going to be more attractive to folks. And I would definitely give this one a shot. And maybe give this one 2 plays, because I remember when I first played, I was like, what's weird about this? And then you kind of get the gist of it, even though the mechanics are really simple. You kind of get the gist of the strategy and sort of the arc of the game, like how and when things are going to be important and when things you thought might have been important actually aren't, and stuff like that, over the course of at least 1 play, definitely into a second play. So that is The Godfather, Corleone's Empire. And the next game is Werewords, and this is another one that I would push high up my list. I think as I was organizing these in sort of a pseudo top 10, this was in the top 2 or 3, right under Gloomhaven. Now, Werewords is basically 20 questions, or if you're familiar with The Insider, combined with One Night Ultimate Werewolf. I think this one has replaced One Night Ultimate Werewolf for myself, for sure, and definitely for the group. It's kind of like One Night Ultimate Werewolf with stuff to do. So instead of just closing your eyes, shuffling roll cards around, messing with stuff, and then sort of doing your deduction based off of that, you have this whole 20 question thing where you are sort of trying to solve this clue that the mayor in this case knows and the werewolf maybe knows. And then based on who's asking what questions or not asking questions, you're trying to solve or not solve the word. Maybe you're the werewolf and don't want to solve it. Then you're deriving your social deduction side out of that and people's behavior. And I find that very, very cool, because it's like, instead of just purely social deduction, you're kind of doing sort of an everyday activity. You're doing sort of your day job in terms of trying to solve the word. But then at the same time, you're keeping a beady eye on all of the other players. So if you think about it in a sort of an abstract sense, you're kind of playing code names away, and trying to doing kind of like a little spy game, trying to guess this special keyword to unlock whatever. And then at the same time, you're keeping an eye on behavior and an interaction of that sort of routine that's going to happen. I find that a lot more interesting than just purely like, oh, this happened, you must have moved this here, I'm the seer, I saw this. And that's sort of a weird sort of high level abstraction. I still like One Night Ultimate Werewolf, obviously, but this gives you kind of something to do and grounds that environment in something solid. So that's really, really cool. So that's Werewords, which I also will say is definitely an improvement over Insider. We've played Insider and liked Insider, but this also kind of fixes some of the weird issues you can get when Insider does flop. And it doesn't always flop, but sometimes it does. So the next game here is Century Spice Road, and I'm going to kind of combine this one with Azul. Now, these are both by the same publisher, Plan B Games, and actually posted a poll on Twitter asking people which one they liked more, and it was resoundingly Azul, which I found interesting. Now, Azul's kind of at this time sort of the new hot game. Azul's great. It's got a cool abstract style to it that's a little bit different than most purely abstract games, and it actually works very well with 3 and 4 players as well as 2 players, which most abstract games are a 2-player game. But the spatial element in Azul is not as heavy-handed. So I think a lot of people are really enamored with Azul, and I certainly am. And I'd frankly kind of forgotten about Century Spice Road, but recently at lunchtime at work, Century Spice Road has kind of come out, and we played this basically right after Azul. There was about a week we were playing other games, and they were like, "Hey, let's try Century again." And really, it was been great to kind of revisit that game and kind of really see the depth of what you can do and how you kind of like get the right cards and really pound them for their actions and the way you kind of draft the cards as they come up, because that's something in Century that you don't really get into too much until you've played it a couple of times and you start to realize, okay, I can kind of chain these cards together better and then make one or two of the cards that I've drafted these big heavy hitters that I can, play for multiple actions on the trade action. And so for my mind, and this is why I posted the poll on Twitter, I was like, man, I can't figure out which one of these I like better because now that I'm playing Century again, I'm like, this is better than I thought it was, and I already liked it. So that's interesting. I think they've had two really great games here, Century and Azul, and I really recommend either of them. And the cool thing about these games is they're so dead simple that you can teach them in like 60 seconds. But there's a lot there underneath the covers that you can play them again and again and again. And I would be somewhat surprised if one or both of these was not nominated for the Spiel des Jahres. I don't know where they fall in terms of being released in Germany and the year of the release date and all that, but in my head, I think Azul could probably win it. But I think Century might have been already on the cusp for last year. I don't frankly remember. But yeah, both of these I highly recommend. Really solid, I think, games that will show themselves to be kind of classics. I think people will be playing Century and Azul, 5-10 years down the road. So that's Century and Azul. And next we have Downforce. And this is from Restoration Games. Now this is a little bit of a reprint of Daytona 500, I think, and as well as some other different versions of it. This one has really come out nice. Now, not everybody has liked this game that I've played it with, and it's actually been a mix between family and the gamer group. Some of the gamers liked it, some of the families liked it, and some have not liked it from either group. For my money, this is the best game that Restorations has released so far. I think they've released 3 games. I know they have Fireball Island coming out maybe next year or 2019. I'm not sure when that will actually hit. But this is a very fun game. Frankly, it replaced Camel Up for me. And Camel Up is a betting game / racing game, and that's what Downforce is. You're going to auction off for a car, but then you have cards that you're going to play over the course of your turns to control all the cars on the board. And then there's going to be different points where you can make bets on the cars that you think are going to win. So you don't have to necessarily bet on the car or cars that you own, quote unquote, but you can kind of shift and mitigate your losses if you're not doing so great to make bets on the other cars. And then the way you play these cards is to sort of play it in such a way that you bottleneck the other players and so on. Really simple game, but very fun and just, quick to play and exciting. And the whole arc and course of the game is going to change up because you got the little betting stages and all that stuff. Just a really, really fun game with these cool little racing cars. That are nice little components and stuff. And so this is kind of like in the same vein as some of those old Knizia horse betting games and stuff like that. But this has definitely been the favorite one that I've played. And like I said, it replaced Camel Up for me. So I think everybody needs a good kind of betting, gambling sort of feeling game because you're going to attract different types of players that get into that aspect of gaming. So that's Downforce. And the next game is another Euro. This came out a little bit earlier, I think around Gen Con time, and that's Whistle Stop. This is from Bezier Games. This is a game that almost plays out like a multi-use card game, but you're using tiles on a board to navigate your trains to get to different locations and score points and make deliveries and all that kind of stuff. And just a very, very unique game in that sense, because the way that you play the tiles on the board can be done in such a way that actually helps other players as well. So you're all kind of playing collectively on this board, trying to set up little kind of route combos. Because you have multiple trains that you can steer, you can set them up in such a way that you block others from coming into your little area, and then you can do activations and move the train and collect cubes and drop cubes off and get points and collect stock, and then kind of try to shoot over to the western side of the board and then drop off and get extra bonuses and score in-game points and stuff like that. This is a very kind of different style game with kind of a lot going on up front, but then it has a lot of variability in terms of kind of smartly playing out your track tiles and interacting with some of the different combos and special bonus gear cards that you can get that allow you to kind of break the rules and stuff. This is just a very unique, different game that have had a lot of time, a lot of fun bringing out throughout the course of the last half of the year. So I definitely recommend it to folks and give this one a couple of plays too, because you're going to see that one game is going to play out definitely differently to the next game, and then especially as people become aware of, you know, being more interactive with their opponents and blocking off routes and trying to create routes that can't be blocked off and stuff like that. So that's Whistle Stop. The next game on the list is Rumble Slam. And I bring this up and I hope people do try this game. Right now, you can only get this game direct from the publisher, although there are plans to bring it over in more of a distribution manner to get it in your local game stores. But you can get this from ttcombat.com. And this is a fantasy wrestling game, kind of like WWF or WCW, whatever you watched when you were a kid or may still watch. And it's fantasy wrestlers that have sort of a giant tag team, but they're all in the ring at the same time. So you have like a team of 5 wrestlers all kind of running around and doing different actions and stuff. Now, the tactics and everything in the gameplay are awesome. So good. I mean, you have different size wrestlers. Some that are just big heavy hitters, but they're slow. Lots of other wrestlers like to, you know, fly off the turnbuckle or fly off the ropes and then jump off the turnbuckle and do cool different special abilities. You've got different effects that will like get the crowd into it, and just all kinds of things going on. And they have a nice line of miniatures. The miniatures are great quality. They're like a resin, but they're like a nice resin, like a nice sturdy thick resin. And there's very little assembly involved. I think I had to glue like 3 little pieces on, and they were just, you know, one was like a giant arm and just plugged into a socket. And so it's just got a lot going for it. And I feel like it's going to be overlooked just because the publisher's so small. You can just get it from them. But there's a lot that you can get into this game. And if you want to get like an extra team of miniatures, it's like $35, you know, and you have a whole other team and you can get like special characters. And it's reasonably priced, and you can paint it if you want. If you're not into painting, I mean, I'd still get it if the gameplay sounds interesting to you. But I highly recommend Rumble Slam. I did like a playthrough / review of it, so you can check that out to get more info on it. But I definitely wanted to, you know, make mention of that because that's definitely flying under the radar. The next game here is another miniatures game. This is Warhammer Underworld Shadespire. This is definitely not flying under the radar. This is sort of taken over my local game store. I think the people that were playing Age of Sigmar mostly play this, not instead of, but it almost seems like it because they've all been playing it quite a bit. It's a very competitive, oriented, sort of skirmish miniatures game. You have a very small war band of characters, and there's like 4 factions you can get now. And the warband itself is going to stay the same, but you actually do like a deck building aspect, kind of like Magic the Gathering, where you build up your decks before the game, and that's going to dictate the combos and the way that you score points in the game when you play it. Really an interesting, innovative game. This is definitely towards the middle top of my list for Game of the Year as I was making the top 10, just because the nature of it is so different than any other kind of game I've played. It really doesn't play out like a miniature game. I mean, when you look at like Age of Sigmar or Rumble Slam or Frostgrave or, you know, something along those lines, it plays out more like a kind of a HeroClix or kind of like Magic the Gathering Planeswalkers, that style game. A little bit like X-Wing because you've got some of the deck building aspects, which is sort of like, you know, building in the pilots and the droids in X-Wing. So it kind of reminds me of that. Definitely one that I would recommend. These are miniatures that you have to assemble, but again, you don't actually have to glue these. You can just clip them out and they all kind of just press in together, and you probably never have to glue them again. You may have an arm that slides out, but I mean, you could just pop it back in, no big deal. I mean, of course I glued and painted mine. You know, and this could be a fun little project, you know, this and Rumble Slam. If you wanted to get into Shadespire, you could get that, and you're like, I've never painted. Well, get that. It's a reasonably priced game, and then just paint them up. Who cares what they look like? And so that could be a fun little thing. The gameplay is definitely going to reward you. And I should say, you don't even have to paint it because the miniatures are color coded. It's like the Stormcast are blue, and the Khorne are red, and so on. And there's a couple expansions that have come out that play very differently. The gameplay seems to be pretty balanced. They had a huge tournament with like 80 or 90 players, and I think the top 4 factions was one of each of the factions, or something like that. It was pretty close. They were all kind of in contention. So a lot of the strategy and things are going to come down to the deck building in that case. But that is Warhammer Underworld's Shadespire. Definitely take a look. The next game or series of games is going to be the Unlock series. And this is the one that was kind of competing up there with Werewords in terms of the next game behind Gloomhaven. I've had a chance to play a couple of these now. There's 3 more that have come out. I think there's 6 total. If you haven't heard of this, it's a escape room type of thing where you have a deck of cards, and that's what you buy. You get like a deck of these cards that are rooms and clues and gadgets and things. Those are about $15 or so, and then you have an app that will help guide you through them, and it works fantastically. And the cool thing is, once you're done with it, you can box up and hand it off to your friend, and then they can play it. So that's something that we've done, with my game group. Oh, you did this one? Well, here, take this one from me, and I'll take the one from you, and I'll play that one, and then we can hand it off to somebody else. And it's really cool. I think this is my favorite escape room series. I played all of them except for the Exit series, which some people tell me I don't need to bother with, and other people need to tell me that that's their favorite escape room style game. But this one is definitely good. It has a lot of atmosphere to it. I like how the cards come out and they show you sort of the environment. You have to actually sort of look in and peek the clues and kind of look at the visual representation of the space that you would be in. So it kind of reminds me the most of being in an actual escape room. And also the way that the app kind of handles giving out hints and clues. And if you get stuck, you can kind of go after it. So that kind of also reminds me mostly of being in an escape room, just in terms of how that process actually, unfolds, in that case. So that's another kind of bonus for it. And the other thing I like about it is if you don't solve it by the allotted hour, you can still keep going. Like, that's the one thing I don't really care for about escape rooms is I can think of one instance where we were entering this is a real escape room I'm talking about. We were entering the actual code, because a lot of the escape rooms, you have to enter a code to the final door and you open the door and you're out. Well, we were at that stage and then, the time ran out. We just barely didn't make it. It was like if we had 2 more minutes, we would have got the thing that the guy came in and said we didn't get, and we would have got it. And it was like, oh, okay. Could you have just let us go for another 5 minutes? And we still doesn't count that we won, but I don't care. At that point, I'm like, okay, we lost. Now, I still want the part of my brain to engage and figure out the puzzle. Like, that's bothering me. And so this lets you do that. You go, okay, we didn't make it, but let's keep going. And we're like, okay, well, we got it. And that actually happened in one of these cases. One of the ones we did, it was kind of the reverse situation. We lost, and we didn't get it done in an hour, but 2 minutes later, we got it. Like, okay, cool. Well, we were that close, and now we know that. We didn't win, but we at least know the answer, and we know what we needed to do to get there. So I really like that aspect of it, and that really kind of brings it home for me with the Unlock series. Now, the next game, we got 3 more here in terms of my sort of cream of the crop list. These next 3 are going to be kind of recent ones that I've just recently reviewed. If you use a deduction, you can tell that they aren't the 2 that I talked about at the beginning. Welcome to Centerville and Tokyo Highway. So if you want to pause and guess, go for it. But the next one is the Expanse board game. I've had a chance to play this several times now at different player counts. And this is kind of plays out like Tammany Hall in space. If you're not familiar with Tammany Hall, it's an older game. It's kind of an area control, stab your neighbor in the back game. And this doesn't seem like that on the surface, but once you play it and you play it with people that have played it a few times, then it starts to become that. And I really enjoy that style of game. Now, the marriage to the theme of the Expanse TV show, which is what this is based on, is sort of tenuous, but it actually has a lot of little nooks and crannies and details that if you watch the show, you'll be like, oh, I can kind of see how this faction would get that mechanic and start with the resources here and do that. So they all make sense within the context of the show. But it has, at its core, and the reason that I like it so much, it's kind of a multiplayer Twilight Struggle / coin series, which are both GMT games, where you have cards that are going to give you action points and cards that are going to give you events. And if you choose the action points, the event on that card might trigger for another player. But you can also pay points, victory points, to actually keep a card in front of you and play that event later on when it'll be more advantageous to you. And that's a really cool innovation on this style of game. And the other thing that's kind of innovative about it is there's a row of cards that you can then choose from. And if you kind of go down the row when you want to get access to, a nice juicy card, you got to pay some points there to get to it. And you got to see how worth it is to you. And it has this cool little trick with the scoring cards that are come up. Sometimes you have to pay points for the scoring card, but if you let it come too far down and let somebody else have it, they're going to choose the scoring card. And when you choose the scoring card, you can then pick an area that doubles scoring or does more than that. Sometimes you can just beefs up the scoring in that area. And then as you choose the different areas to score bonuses, those will kind of dwindle and you won't be able to do it there. So people are going to shift focus on this different area control thing that's happening into different areas that haven't been scored with bonuses yet. So just the way that whole little thing plays together is just great. So this is definitely one that I recommend folks try and get access to. And if you are a fan of The Expanse, it's definitely a TV show. I think you'll get a good kick out of this as well. So that was The Expanse board game. And the next one here is Heaven and Ale. So that's ale like the beer, not heaven and hell. But what the theme of this is you have sort of monks and farms and you're trying to create a sort of a brewery factory in the Middle Ages and get these up and score victory points and, score money and stuff along the way to kind of build your engine. This is a very interesting, different style of game, and another one that's up there with Yokohama and stuff. And Whistle Stop is one of my favorite Euros to play this year. It has some really just different things that are going on. The way that you score points is just so different. You don't really even score any points in the game at all. You build up kind of these different production values in these different resources, and you're trying to sort of build them up equally and move your brewmaster up this track, which gives you sort of a expertise in brewing. In the meantime, though, you're sort of building out naturally and organically and visually your farms and in your sheds and your different production areas, and trying to sort of use those and activate those to kind of supplement you for income as you do all this other stuff. And then it kind of right at the end, you see, okay, how good of a brewery did I make? It's really very mechanic heavy. I would definitely say go watch my review of it, but it does a lot of really cool, smart things mechanically. It has a lot of variability and replayability, I think. And it has a lot of sort of deviousness to it because I've seen scores all over the map with this game. So definitely give this one a close look at it. And the theme of it actually really comes through. The first time I played, I was like, where is the theme? This is one of those simple, dry Euros that really is just a bunch of mechanics. And it is, but the theme is very subtle, and it's definitely more of atmosphere than theme. But it really comes through once you get a game or two under your belt. So that is Heaven and Ale. And the last game on the list here is a recent review. This is A Hunt for the Ring, which I must confess I have not played part 2 of so far. And you kind of sort of need to based on some feedback of my review. But I think you could get away with playing part 1 with some caveats that you want to bump up difficulty and so on for that initial intro. But this is a really innovative take on the hidden movement deduction style of game like Fury of Dracula or Scotland Yard and so on. I'll give you a couple of takeaways with this one. I just reviewed it, so you can go watch the review. But the main takeaway for me is that once the players, let's say, catch Frodo, and what this is Frodo and the hobbits are trying to get the ring from Hobbiton to Bree and then to Rivendell, and the Nazgul players are trying to catch him. But if the Nazgul players catch Frodo, then Frodo does not just lose the game, he spends some corruption points and then gets to escape and then move on. So you're trying to just, get Frodo to spend corruption. There's other things in the game that will add to corruption. but it doesn't end the game in a very abrupt way. So the game should play out relatively, the same amount over the course of, multiple plays. And then there's a couple other different things too. A lot of the mechanics and things that it does with the dice-driven actions of the Nazgul, they've really got to manage that, and it's a definite resource management kind of attitude that's happening there. And there's a lot of card management and things like that. So there's a lot more kind of happening in terms of what you're doing and how it's kind of complementing the hidden movement side of the game. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. And I just did a review of it, so my thoughts are kind of repetitive in my head about it. But definitely take a look at that review and get a sense of how it plays. I think probably this has replaced Fury of Dracula for me. Even just playing part one, and everybody at the table that I've talked to and some other people I've played it with outside of my game group were like, huh, wow, I like this better than Fury of Dracula already. So yeah, anyway, I haven't kicked either of them out of the collection yet. So they're both on the shelf as I'm looking at them right now. But this is definitely a high quality hidden movement game. So that's the kind of the games I definitely want to feature. There are 5 games that I plan on playing really soon that I feel like could make this list based on what I know. And so just to kind of tell you, if you ask me, what about this game? Well, here's 5 that definitely what about them, because I'm interested to play these and have all of them except one, and definitely are going to get the other one and play it. I'll just go through it. Gaia Project, basically Terra Mystica in space. Got that ready to play it. I mean, just got it, and it just hitting the shelves in the stores now. So there's no way I could play it and add it to the list, because it's not really out. Next one, Legacy of Dragonholt. This is the one I don't have. This looks like a giant choose-your-own-adventure role-playing extravaganza co-op kind of thing. Looks amazing, and I should have picked this one up earlier, but I didn't. Next one is Spirit Island, which I've had. Just haven't had a chance to get it played. I feel like this one is a very innovative take on a co-op. It's sort of like Settlers of Catan in reverse, but you're playing a co-op. You're like playing as the island trying to drive back the settlers. It looks really cool. Time of Crisis, which I just got as well. This is one that's just been buzzing around and is sort of in that war game vein that I've sort of neglected this year. This one looks really cool. I've actually read the rules to it. Looks very dynamic, almost like a Game of Thrones diplomacy aspect with some cool sort of deck building. I don't know, it looks real funky, looks good. And then the new Necromunda, which I haven't had a chance to get into because I've been sucked back into 40K and Age of Sigmar as far as the miniature stuff is going. But I really want to get after Necromunda. I really enjoyed Shadow War. I've watched a lot of battle reports of the new Necromunda, and just from reading the rules, I feel like this is an improved version of the original Necromunda and Shadow War and stuff. So I think that could be one that I enjoy a lot. And so that's kind of just the general stuff that I think I missed. Moving into my kind of bonus random, was in my top 5 of 2018. And these aren't really in order because I don't really know if they're good. These are just the ones that I'm anticipating. I guess I'll just name them here. Brass. There's 2 versions of Brass Lancashire and Brass something or other. It looks really cool. I'm glad they've reinvested in this system and started to expand on it, because that was the one thing I liked about Age of Industry over Brass is I could play it on multiple different maps, and it wasn't stuck with the same sort of static nature of the map. So I'm glad that somebody has sort of acquired the license and hopefully there'll be ways to kind of enhance it and stuff like that. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's a system that I've really enjoyed through Age of Industry, which is a slightly tweaked version of Brass. So that'll be pretty cool. Next one is Time of Legends, Joan of Arc. This looks insane, and I would have backed the Kickstarter, but the dollar amount got out of hand. So I'm hoping they just have like a, typical, like just regular edition that comes out, and I can pick it up for a little cheaper than kind of the MSRP value. Looks like a really kind of epic 15 millimeter scale miniature / board game, has some kind of fantasy civilization types of attitudes going on. Looks really, really neat. Definitely Google that one and look it up on Board Game Geek. Looks really interesting and very different. Although I read the rules to it, and it seems a little simplistic, and that was one of the things that made me shy off backing it. It didn't seem bad. I was like, oh, that seems good, but it also seemed a little bit like, I've seen this before. But I'm still looking forward to it a lot, and I think I'll have fun with it. Next one is Rising Sun, which I should be receiving here pretty soon. Speaking of backing things, this is Eric Lang design. It looks like more of a Game of Thrones diplomacy style game than like Blood Rage or Godfather, which are two games that I've kept. And so this is probably the most up my alley out of these style of area control games. I love like Game of Thrones, and a lot of mechanics and stuff from reading the rules several months ago really reminded me of the Game of Thrones board game. Kind of like a 2.0 of that, so to speak. But that's just, glancing through the rules. Really excited about that one. The next one is Detective, a modern crime board game. This is from Portal Games. And this is, oh gosh, how to explain this? It's almost like Sherlock Holmes consulting detective-ish, sort of. But you get to use your phone to go and Google things that are sort of a common knowledge thing. So I'm just making this up the top of my head. But if you needed to know, like, about the engine in the 1984 Toyota Corolla or some feature like that, some kind of random factoid that would help you solve a case, I'm like, that sounds really, really neat, because kind of the world is your oyster in that way. And theoretically, this is me just kind of postulating and guessing, in the future of the game, or maybe even in the game, you can almost build it like an ARG, which is an alternate reality game. So maybe there's a website that you go to that seems like a real website, but it has clues to solving this mystery. Or you can have like a fake Facebook account. You go and look up this face. Now, Facebook probably has rules against this, but you could have a fake Facebook account, or you could have a Facebook page that looks like a Facebook account, right? You could make it as a marketing brand page, but it looks like a personal page that would then, you have to kind of go through it and look at like, whatever clues to help you solve whatever the crimes are. It just sounds super fascinating to me. So that's Detective, a modern crime board game. And the last one is Apocalypse Road, and this is coming from GMT Games. This is based on a racing game that they came out with a couple of years ago called Thunder Alley, where it was a car-driven racing game. You had like a team of cars. You played cards to kind of drive them and stuff and drift, or not drift, but draft the other cars and all that. So this is going to use a similar car-driven system. It's a great game. But it's also going to be basically like playing Twisted Metal or Mad Max. You're going to have guns in the cars and be able to shoot at the other cars and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, I'm in. This is what I wanted. I want Thunder Alley to do this. And frankly, I would like them to make an expansion to automobiles from AEG that had the same thing, but I think they won't. Anyway, so those are the kind of the top 5 I'm looking forward to in 2018, which is always rough because none of the Essen games are announced until like June at the earliest. So there's a whole like 1,000 games that I may not even know that exist yet. So that is kind of my general overview of 2017, a little bit of a whirlwind there. These top 10 lists and lists like this are so odd because they're so temporary and fleeting and worthless in some ways. The order of them to me is completely worthless. That's the one thing you got to order them. I mean, you got to just kind of order them, but it just leaves a sour feeling in my stomach saying that this is my favorite game. And man, I wish I could sit there and maybe talk to a psychiatrist about this, because I could probably get my feelings out more. But like, even saying like Kalis is my favorite game of all time, which it is, if you forced me to answer that, I would say yes. But man, it just so depends on the mood and people I'm playing with and so many different things. Gosh. And, if I've played Kalis 3 times in a row, I don't want to play it again. I want to play something else. So at that instant, Kalis is not my favorite game because I don't want to play it. And just these lists, I don't know. I love the listing of it, though. I like the list in terms of when I was kind of getting new into the hobby and getting to a point where I was researching games and looking at them. Lists were great because then I could say, okay, so Tom Vassell loves this game. He put it number 68 on his list. He described it for about 2 minutes. Sounds interesting. Add it to my list to research. All the way up and down. And everybody doing that is great. I go find geek lists of people doing that aren't necessarily a media personality, and those are great. The lists themselves are great. The order of the list, bleh. I could care less about the order. Just give me a list, 50 games, 10 games, 100 games. I will go research myself and then find out what sounds interesting to me. Anyway, so that's kind of my thing with these lists, as I probably said 100,000 times. But as I said, I'm going to take a little bit of a break here from the video and podcasting side of it. I will probably see you all in February, and I'll be posting on Twitter and the Facebook page as I play games and give you my thoughts on them there and just be chatty about all that fun stuff. And I hope everybody has a good new year in 2018. Takes care of yourselves. Don't get too hysterical about anything that you see. Just try to take comfort in the games and the friends that you have. And that's about it. So take care. I love all you. Thanks. Bye.